The grand chamber of the galactic concordat was a marvel of crystalline architecture and harmonious light, a testament to 10,000 cycles of peace. Yet in this moment, it felt like a tomb. The air, usually scented with the calming pheromones of the Vross and the gentle ionization preferred by the Ethelgard, was thick with the acrid taste of terror. High Counselor Alara of the Sylvari stood at the center of the obsidian podium, her translucent, violet-hued skin shifting in rapid pulses of distress. Above her, the great holographic dome that usually displayed the serene trade routes of the galaxy was now a chaotic smear of red warning glyphs and fracturing borders. The silence that filled the vast, circular hall was not the silence of contemplation, but the suffocating quiet of a prey animal hoping the predator passes by. But the predator was not passing. The predator was at the door, and it was hungry. Alara's large, obsidian eyes scanned the tiered rows of the Concordat's representatives, hundreds of species, the pinnacle of galactic civilization, all evolved on lush, forgiving garden worlds, and she saw only aversion. They looked away. The Vross ambassador folded his many limbs in a gesture of dismissal. The Ethelgard representative dimmed its bioluminescence to a sullen gray. They had abandoned her people. The Caithar Dominion, a swarm of chitinous horrors from the galactic fringe, had breached the Sylvari outer systems, and the Concordat had voted to quarantine the sector rather than fight. "You condemn billions to harvest," Alara whispered, her voice amplified by the acoustic perfection of the chamber, causing the crystal walls to vibrate with her sorrow. "The Sylvari have been the scholars of this union for 3 millennia. We curated your histories. We tended the great archives. And now, because the enemy is frightening, because their ships are coated in the blood of stars, you seal the blast doors and leave us in the dark." The Vross ambassador, a being of soft flesh and high intellect, finally spoke, his voice a melodic trill that grated on Alara's nerves. "High Counselor, logic dictates the preservation of the core. The Caithar are biological entropists. They consume. To engage them is to invite them to the heart of the Concordat. We mourn your loss, truly, but the equation of survival requires subtraction." Subtraction. That was what her people were to them now. A variable to be removed to balance the equation. Alara felt a coldness settle in her heart, a sensation alien to her species, something hardening within her gelatinous core. She looked at the console before her, her slender fingers hovering over a sealed, forbidden protocol. The galaxy was vast, and the Concordat believed it had mapped the safe zones, labeling the dangerous regions as abyssal zones or dead space. But there was one sector, isolated by magnetic storms and gravitational anomalies, that was not dead, merely quarantined by ancient decree. It was the home of the Sol Terrans, the Deathworlders. The Concordat taught its young to fear that region, not because the inhabitants were evil, but because they were impossible. Creatures evolved on a world of crushing gravity, tectonic violence, and predatory competition, so fierce that their very existence defied the gentle laws of garden world biology. They were considered unstable, prone to violence, and terrifyingly resilient. The Concordat had shunned them, placing warning buoys around their system to keep the barbarians in and the civilized galaxy out. But legend said that the Deathworlders had a code. A primitive, archaic concept of honor bound to the violence of their existence. Alara had studied the forbidden texts. She knew the frequency. "If the Concordat will not act," Alara said, her voice dropping to a register of absolute finality, "then I invoke the right of desperation. I will call upon those you fear more than the Caithar." A ripple of genuine shock moved through the chamber. The Ethelgard flared bright orange in alarm. "You cannot," the Vross hissed, standing on his hind legs. "The Sol system is under interdiction. They are monsters, Alara. If you invite the Deathworlders into our space, you invite fire itself. They do not understand diplomacy. They understand only kinetic energy and conquest. You will doom us all." Alara did not flinch. The image of her home world, burning under the orbital bombardment of the Caithar, filled her mind. The screams of her kin, transmitted via quantum entanglement, echoed in her soul. She pressed the sequence. It was a long, complex string of prime numbers and old radio frequencies. A scream cast into the void, aimed at a yellow dwarf star far across the spiral arm. "The signal is sent," she stated, stepping back from the podium as the console locked. "We die today, Ambassador. Whether we die by the claws of the Caithar or the fire of the Terrans makes little difference to the dead. But at least the Terrans might kill our murderers first." The chamber erupted into chaos, shouts and accusations flying through the air, but it was too late. The message had pierced the subspace barrier. It carried no diplomatic preamble, no nuanced offers of trade. It contained only the raw telemetry of the Caithar genocide and a single, translated phrase from an ancient Terran dialect that Alara had found in the archives. Here there be dragons, and we are being eaten. The hours that followed were an agonizing study in fatalism. The Concordat fleet, a decorative force meant for parades and pirate suppression, held a defensive perimeter around the sanctum, but everyone knew it was a gesture, not a strategy. Sensors soon screamed the arrival of the Caithar. Space tore open at the edge of the system, bleeding purple Cherenkov radiation as the enemy armada spilled forth. They did not use elegant warp drives. They brute-forced reality, tearing holes in the fabric of spacetime. The Caithar ships were organic nightmares, grown rather than built, massive spires of black bone and pulsing veins, armed with bioplasma that dissolved matter on contact. They swarmed like locusts, bypassing the outer buoys and heading straight for the sanctum. Alara watched from the viewport of her private sanctum, her hands pressed against the cold transparency. The Vross and Ethelgard were preparing to flee, their escape shuttles already warming up, abandoning the Silvari refugees huddled in the station's cargo bays. "They are here," her aide, a young Silvari named Liss, whimpered by her side. "The signal! Did anyone answer?" Alara stared at the void. The distance to Sol was vast. Even with subspace communications, travel took time, and that was assuming the Deathworlders even cared. Why would they? The galaxy had spat on them, called them brutes, locked them in their gravity well. "I do not know, Liss," Alara murmured. "Perhaps they are just a myth. Or perhaps they are exactly what the Concordat says, mad beasts who burned themselves out eons ago." The first Caithar bioship opened fire. A stream of caustic green energy slammed into the Concordat's defensive shield, shattering the harmony of the protective grid. The station shook violently. Alarms blared, a cacophony of doom. The enemy fleet did not hail them, they did not negotiate. They simply fed. The slaughter began in the outer orbits. The Concordat patrol ships were swatted aside like insects, their hulls crumpling under the impact of macro cannons that fired calcified bone shards at relativistic speeds. Alara watched a Vross cruiser disintegrate, its atmosphere venting into space in a silent puff of glitter. Tears she could not shed welled in her throat. It was over. The gamble had failed. The universe was cruel, and the weak were meat. She turned to Liss to give the order for mass euthanasia, a final mercy to spare them from the Caithar larders, when the sensor grid gave a lurch. It wasn't a warning ping. It was a gravitational shear so intense that the artificial gravity on the station flickered, sending loose data pads floating into the air for a terrifying second. The tear in space that followed was not the jagged, bleeding wound of the Caithar drive. It was a surgical incision. A perfect circle of absolute darkness expanded between the Caithar swarm and the sanctum, eclipsing the starlight. It was a geometry so precise it hurt the eyes to look at, a sphere of void that seemed to inhale the surrounding light. And then, from the darkness, it emerged. It was not a fleet. It was a single vessel. But the scale of it defied the logic of the Concordat's engineering. It was a monolith of matte gray alloy, scarred and pitted, shaped like a spearhead driven through the heart of a dead god. It possessed no glowing nacelles, no elegant fins, no aesthetic curves. It was a brick of war, industrial and brutal, its surface bristling with kinetic batteries and railgun spines that ran the length of its multi-kilometer hull. It dwarfed the largest Caithar hive ship. Silence fell over the sanctum's bridge. Even the panicked Vross stopped their fleeing to stare at the impossible object. The vessel didn't break, it didn't decelerate with retro-rockets. It simply stopped, negating inertia with a mastery of physics that the Concordat had deemed theoretical. The sheer mass of the ship caused the Caithar formation to drift, pulled in by its gravitational wake. Then a transmission blasted across all frequencies. It bypassed the translation matrices, overriding the station's audio systems with a raw, analog power that made the speakers crackle. "This is the United Earth ship Hephaestus," a voice boomed. It was deep, calm, and terrifyingly flat. It sounded like grinding stones. "We received a distress call designated existential threat level. Confirm identity of the aggressor." Alara scrambled to the communications console, shoving aside a stunned technician. Her hands shook. "This is High Counselor Alara of the Silvari. The G-Gressor is the Caithar Dominion. They are consuming us, please. We have no defenses." There was a pause that stretched for an eternity. Then the voice returned, devoid of panic, devoid of rage. "Acknowledged, stand by, Silvari, verification complete. Aggressor identified as hostile force, class, exterminator. The pact is invoked." The connection cut. There were no threats issued to the Caithar, no demands for surrender. The human ship simply rotated, its massive spinal mount aligning with the center of the Kythar swarm. "They are alone," the Vross ambassador whispered, having crept back to the bridge, his eyes wide with a mix of horror and fascination. "One ship against a swarm of thousands. They are mad. They will be overwhelmed." Indeed, the Kythar, recovering from the shock, turned their attention to the newcomer, the biological imperative to consume overrode fear. 1,000 hive ships turned and unleashed a barrage of plasma and bone shards that would have cracked a planet's crust. The sky turned green with the intensity of the fire. The human ship vanished beneath the onslaught, swallowed by the explosions. Alara closed her eyes. It was hubris. One ship could not stop the tide. But when the smoke of the vacuum cleared, the Hephaestus remained. A shimmering honeycomb field of gold energy hugged its hull, flaring intensely but holding firm. The humans hadn't even moved. The kinetic energy of the Kythar barrage had been absorbed, fed into capacitors that glowed with increasing brightness along the ship's flanks. "Kinetic absorption at 90%, the human voice returned, sounding almost bored. "Main batteries hot, firing solution locked, all hands brace for recoil, fire." The term fire was inadequate. The human ship did not merely shoot, it unleashed the wrath of a star. Along its flanks, hundreds of railguns accelerated tungsten slugs to a significant percentage of light speed. There were no lasers, no plasma bolts, just pure, unadulterated mass and velocity. The result was catastrophic for the Kythar. The slugs punched through the biological armor of the hive ships as if they were wet paper. Kinetic shockwaves rippled through the organic hulls, liquefying the crews inside before the ships shattered into clouds of frozen gore. But the main gun was a nightmare. A beam of focused particle acceleration erupted from the bow, a lance of blue-white light that pierced the largest hive ship, traveled through its length, and continued on to skewer 3 ships behind it. The silence of space was filled with the visual cacophony of destruction. The battle, if it could be called that, was a massacre. The Kythar, who had never known defeat, who relied on fear and overwhelming numbers, found themselves fighting a rock that shot back. They tried to close the distance, to board the human vessel, but the Hephaestus deployed point defense cannons that created a wall of lead and flak, shredding the boarding pods. It was mechanical precision against biological chaos. It was the discipline of a death world against the hunger of a predator. Within 20 minutes, the Kythar fleet was reduced to drifting debris. The survivors, sensing a predator far greater than themselves, broke formation and fled, tearing jagged wounds in space to escape the monsters from Sol. The Hephaestus did not pursue. It vented coolant steam from massive ports, creating a nebula of ice crystals around its hull. It hung there, ominous and silent, turning its sensors toward the sanctum. "Threat neutralized," the voice said. "Prepare to receive a delegation. We are coming aboard." The docking bay of the sanctum was a place of delicate beauty, designed for the graceful skiffs of the garden worlds. When the human transport arrived, it was like a tank driving into a greenhouse. The shuttle was blocky, heavily armored, and marked with hazard stripes. It clamped onto the docking ring with a metallic screech of magnetic locks, stressing the delicate superstructure. Alara stood at the forefront of the welcoming committee, flanked by the terrified Vross and Ethelgard ambassadors. The airlock cycled, steam hissed. The heavy blast doors groaned as they were forced open by hydraulics. The humans who stepped out were not the ogres the legends described, but they were intimidating in a way that was far worse. They were encased in powered armor of matte black, faceless helmets glowing with internal HUDs. They moved with a heavy, deliberate grace, their boots clanking rhythmically on the deck. They were tall, broader than any Sylvari, and radiated a sense of density. Gravity seemed to cling to them. The lead figure reached up and unsealed their helmet. A hiss of pressurization, and the helmet was removed to reveal a face. It was a male, skin weathered and pale, eyes the color of steel with a scar running down his jawline. He looked tired, not angry, not triumphant, just weary. "I am Admiral Sterling," the human sighed. His voice was naturally loud, accustomed to shouting over machinery. He looked around the delicate crystalline bay, his gaze lingering on the fragile Sylvari. "Who is the one who sent the signal?" Alara stepped forward, her legs trembling but her head held high. "I am Alara. I sent the cry. You saved us. The Concordat said you were monsters. They said you would burn the galaxy." Sterling looked at the Vross ambassador, who shrank back behind a pillar. The human's lip curled slightly, not in a smile, but in a look of grim understanding. "The Concordat says many things. They like their gardens. They like their peace. But they forget that gardens are only peaceful because someone kills the weeds." He turned back to Alara. We are not monsters, counselor, but we come from a world where nature tries to kill us every day. We learned early that if you want to survive, you must be stronger than the storm. And if you want to be civilized, you must use that strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Why? The Vross ambassador blurted out, unable to contain his confusion. Why risk your ship? Why waste resources? We have nothing to offer you. The Sylvari have nothing. Sterling laughed, a dry, barking sound. That is the difference between us, ambassador. You calculate the cost of a life. You weigh the equation. On Earth, we have a saying, the strong protect the weak. It isn't about profit. It isn't about trade. It's about the pact. The pact? Ilera asked softly. Long ago, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a storytelling cadence that held the entire Bay captive. Humanity almost destroyed itself. We fought wars over ideology, resources, land. We were violent, chaotic. We looked into the abyss of our own nature. And then we made a choice. We decided that if we were to be the deadliest things in the void, we would direct that violence outward against the things that would harm the innocent. We became the fire that burns the plague. You called for help. That is enough. The mood in the Bay shifted. The fear remained, but it was mixed with awe. These were not mindless berserkers. They were warrior philosophers burdened by a heavy morality, but the tension was far from over. Sterling tapped a command on his gauntlet, and a holographic projection sprang up from his wrist projector. It showed the galaxy, but with layers of data the Concordat had never seen. Red veins pulsed through the map, converging on the sector the Caithar had come from. We didn't just come to save you, Sterling said, his tone turning grave. The Caithar were running. They weren't invading for food. They were fleeing. Ilera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the life support. Fleeing? From what? They are the apex predators of the Rim. No, Sterling said. They are scavengers. Something woke up in the dark, Ilera, something old. We have been watching the perimeter of the galaxy for centuries, holding the line, but the signal you sent, it acted as a beacon, not just to us, but to it. The Vross ambassador looked at the map. The abyssal void, but that is empty space, dead space. It's not empty, the human soldier standing next to Sterling spoke for the first time. Her voice was sharp, analytical. It's a containment zone, and the cage has been rattled. Sterling nodded. The Caithar were pushed out of their nests by a shockwave of psychic dissonance, the kind that precedes a Class Omega incursion. We answered your cry with fire, yes. But now we need to ask you, are you ready to help us hold the torch? Because the night is getting darker. The revelation hung heavy in the air. The Concordat had spent millennia playing politics, ignoring the dark corners of the universe, believing their high walls and treaties would save them. Now, the walls were shown to be paper, and the only thing standing between them and the true dark were the Deathworlders they had scorned. Ilera looked at the holographic map, at the red creeping stain. She looked at Sterling, this dense, scarred creature of gravity and violence who spoke of protection. She realized then that the definitions of civilized and barbarian were wrong. The Concordat was a child hiding under the covers. Humanity was the parent standing at the door with a shotgun. What do you need? Ilera asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Sterling looked at her with newfound respect. The Hephaestus is powerful, but we are one ship. The swarm that ran from the dark is gone, but the shadow that chased them is coming. We need your sensor networks. We need the Vross logistics. We need the Ethelgard energy matrices. We provide the iron, you provide the eyes. We need to form a line. The Vross ambassador shook his head. The Council will never agree. They will flee to the core systems. They will hide. Then they will die in the dark, Sterling said bluntly. This isn't a negotiation. The enemy that is coming doesn't want your territory. It wants your consciousness. It feeds on thought. We are resistant. Our minds are chaotic, too noisy, but you, he gestured to the Sylvari and Vross. You are bright lights in a dark room. You are delicious. The meeting moved from the docking bay to the grand chamber. The presence of the humans in the delicate crystal hall was a visual clash of eras. They brought heavy crates of equipment, setting up tactical displays that hummed with aggressive power. The Concordat representatives who hadn't fled watched in stunned silence as the humans took command. There was no debate, no voting. Sterling simply laid out the tactical reality. The Shadow was a hive-mind entity from outside the galactic plane, a parasitic frequency that enslaved biological matter. The humans called it the Silence. We fought it once before we left Earth, Sterling explained to the gathered assembly. It's why we went to the stars armed to the teeth. It's why we built our ships like hammers. You can't reason with it. You can't trade with it. You can only burn it out. As the humans worked, Alara found herself standing on a balcony with Admiral Sterling. He was looking out at the nebula, smoking a small, burning stick. Tobacco, he called it. The smell was pungent but strangely grounding. "You are afraid," Sterling observed, not looking at her. "Terrified," Alara admitted. "My people are glass, Admiral. We vibrate with the universe. Violence shatters us. I fear that even if we survive this, we will be broken. We will become like you, hard, scarred." Sterling turned to her, his expression softening. "There is no shame in scars, Alara. Scars mean you survived. Scars mean you had something worth fighting for. You think your fragility is a weakness. It's not. It's why we fight. If the universe was only made of iron and rock, it wouldn't be worth saving. We need the glass. We need the art, the history, the gentle songs. That is the burden of the Deathworlder. We carry the weight so you can fly." It was a philosophy so profound, yet so simple, that Alara felt tears prick her eyes again. The humans were not just warriors. They were tragic figures. They had sacrificed their own innocence to preserve the innocence of others. The klaxons sounded. Not the Concordat alarms this time, but the harsh, grinding wail of the human proximity alert. "Contact," the tactical officer shouted from the floor below. "Subspace rupture detected. Massive scale. It's not the Caithar, it's the silence." The view screen turned black, not the black of space, but a moving, shifting darkness that blotted out the stars. It was a cloud of nanite dust and psionic energy, a wave of nothingness crashing against reality. Within the cloud, shapes moved, twisted, corrupted versions of ships it had consumed over eons. "Battle stations," Sterling said, tossing the cigarette away. He put his helmet back on, the faceplate sliding shut with a snap. The weary man was gone, the machine of war returned. "Alara, link your sensor grid to the Hephaestus. We need to see the heart of the swarm." "Done," Alara said, her fingers flying across her console. The battle that ensued was different from the slaughter of the Caithar. This was a struggle for the soul of the sector. The silence attacked not just with weapons, but with despair. Psionic screams echoed in the minds of every being on the station. The Vross collapsed, seizing. The Silvari wept, overwhelmed by a wave of grief. Only the humans seemed immune. Their chaotic, loud minds, forged in the fires of Earth's frantic history, acted as a natural shield. They broadcasted counter-frequencies, heavy metal music, shouting orders, mathematical constants, noise that disrupted the silence's control. The Hephaestus plunged into the cloud. It was a leviathan swimming into a hurricane. Its railguns fired continuously, the barrels glowing white-hot. Nuclear warheads detonated in proximity blasts, carving pockets of light in the darkness. But the swarm was endless. It began to envelope the human ship, eroding its shields. "Shields at 40%, came the shout over the comms. "Hull integrity compromised on decks 7 through 10. "Hold the line," Sterling's voice cut through the static. "Alara, I need that target lock on the central node. Where is the brain?" I can't see it," Alara cried, fighting the psychic pressure crushing her mind. "It's everywhere." "Focus," Sterling roared. "Look past the fear. You are Silvari. You see the resonance of things. Find the dissonance. Find the note that doesn't fit." Alara closed her eyes. She stopped looking with sensors and started listening with her soul. She felt the screaming of the Vross, the cold anger of the humans, the hunger of the silence. And there, buried deep in the cloud, was a void, a point of absolute silence, a conductor leading the orchestra of death. "Sector 49, coordinates static," Alara screamed. "Received," Sterling replied. "All power to the Nova cannon, vent the capacitors. This is one-way trip for the heat sinks." The Hephaestus did something reckless. It dropped its shields entirely. It diverted every ounce of power from life support, from gravity, from defense into the main spinal mount. The ship became a defenseless piece of metal for 10 seconds. The silence sensed the vulnerability and surged forward, tendrils of darkness latching onto the hull, tearing at the armor plates. 5 seconds, the tactical officer counted down. "Hull breach in engineering. We are losing atmosphere." "Steady," Sterling commanded. 3 seconds. Boarders reported on deck 4. "Steady. 1. Burn it." The Hephaestus fired. This was not a beam of light. It was a capsule of antimatter contained in a stasis field, accelerated to 0.9 light speed. It struck the coordinates Alara had found. The stasis field collapsed. Matter and antimatter annihilated each other in the heart of the cloud. The explosion was silent in the vacuum, but the release of energy was blinding. A miniature sun was born and died in a microsecond. The shockwave of pure radiation shredded the nanite cloud, disrupting the psionic link. The silence shrieked, a psychic sound that knocked everyone on the station unconscious. When Alara woke, the silence was real, the peaceful, empty silence of space. The darkness was gone, the stars were back. She pulled herself up to the console. "Admiral," she croaked. Static, then a cough. "We're here, counselor, a bit battered. We vented most of our atmosphere, and I think I broke my arm when the gravity failed, but the cloud is dispersed. The entity is neutralized." Alara looked at the Hephaestus. It was a wreck. Armor plates were peeled back like tin cans. Fires flickered in open breaches, quickly snuffed by emergency foam. It looked dead. But as she watched, maneuvering thrusters fired. It was correcting its drift. It was still fighting. In the aftermath, the political landscape of the galaxy was shattered. The Concordat could not pretend the threat didn't exist, and they could not deny who had saved them. The Vross and Ethelgard were shamed, their arrogance stripped away by the reality of their survival. A week later, a formal council was held. This time, Admiral Sterling stood at the podium, his arm in a sling, his armor battered and unpainted. He looked out at the rows of aliens who had once looked at him with disgust. Now they looked with fear and reverence. "The silence will return," Sterling said, his voice echoing without the need for amplification. "It is a cosmic tide, it ebbs and flows. We pushed it back today, but we cannot hold the wall alone forever. Earth is answering the call. Our fleets are mobilizing. We are opening the Sol Gate." He paused, looking at Alara, who sat in the front row, no longer a desperate victim, but a partner. "We offer you an alliance," Sterling continued. "Not of trade, but of survival. We will teach you how to build walls. We will teach you how to fight. And in exchange, you will remind us what we are fighting for. You will keep our souls intact while we dirty our hands." The Vross ambassador stood up. "And if we refuse, if we wish to return to our peace?" Sterling smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Then we will protect you anyway, because that is what humans do. But know this, the universe has teeth. You can either be the meat or you can be the hunter. We are offering you a spear." Alara stood up. She looked at her fellow counselors, then at the human admiral. "The Sylvari accept. We will not be meat. We will be the eyes of the spear." One by one, the other races stood. The Ethelgard, the Vross, even the minor races from the fringe. The Concordat died that day, and the Terran Alliance was born. As the meeting adjourned, Alara walked with Sterling toward the hangar bay. The Hephaestus was being repaired by a swarm of Concordat drones and human engineers working side by side. "You said you answered the cry with fire," Alara said softly. "But you brought more than that. You brought hope." Sterling looked at the stars, at the distant yellow speck that was his home. "Fire is dangerous, Alara. It destroys, but if you control it, if you respect it, it also keeps the cold away. We are the Deathworlders. We are the fire in the dark, and as long as we stand, the cold will not take you." The journey of the galaxy had changed. The garden worlds had lost their innocence, but they had gained a protector. And out in the deep void, the ancient horrors that watched the spiral arm sensed a new presence. A presence that did not fear the dark because it had been born in it. The humans had arrived, and they had brought their fire with them. The final image on the view screen was not of the Council, but of the Hephaestus undergoing repairs. On its hull, a Sylvari artist had painted a new symbol next to the human insignia. It was a crystal flower wrapped in iron thorns, a promise, a warning, a new dawn forged in the heart of a death world. The cry had been answered. And the galaxy would never be quiet again. Alara watched the repairs for a long time, her mind racing with the implications of the future. The sheer scale of what had happened was only just beginning to settle in her mind. The humans were not just a military force, they were a cultural shockwave. She had seen their crew in the days following the battle. They were diverse, boisterous, chaotic. They played loud music, they argued passionately about trivial things, they consumed mild toxins for recreation. Compared to the serene, synchronized existence of the Sylvari, they were madness incarnate. But in that madness lay their strength. Their unpredictability was a weapon. The silence, a hive mind of absolute order and uniformity, had faltered against the chaotic resonance of the human mind. It was a philosophical victory as much as a kinetic one. She remembered a conversation with one of the human engineers, a woman named Rodriguez who was welding a patch onto the hull. Alara had asked her how they coped with the constant threat of death. Rodriguez had laughed, wiping grease from her forehead. Counselor on Earth, we have storms that can flatten cities, volcanoes that darken the sky, and viruses that mutate faster than we can cure them. We don't cope by ignoring death. We cope by spitting in its eye and inviting it for a drink. We live despite the universe. That was the lesson the Concordat needed to learn, to live despite. For millennia, they had lived because the conditions were perfect, because the technology was safe, because the treaties held. They had forgotten how to struggle. The humans were a reminder that struggle was the engine of evolution. In the weeks that followed, the Sol Gate was opened. It was a massive megastructure on the edge of the heliopause, a dormant relay that the humans had reactivated. Through it came the rest of the Terran fleet. If the Hephaestus was a shock, the fleet was a revelation. Dreadnoughts the size of cities, carriers launching wings of fighters that moved like angry hornets, hospital ships gleaming white, and terraforming vessels carrying the seeds of new worlds. They poured into the sector, not as conquerors, but as a stabilizing force. They established the Aegis Line, a series of fortified stations along the rim of the abyssal void. The Sylvari were instrumental in this. Their crystal tech was integrated into the human sensor grids, creating a detection network that could spot a subspace ripple light years away. The Vross, swallowing their pride, offered their advanced logistics algorithms to manage the supply lines of this massive new war machine. The Ethelgard provided energy shielding technology that, when combined with human reactors, created barriers that could withstand planetary impacts. It was a golden age born of terror. The Pax Terrana was not a piece of silence, but a piece of vigilance. One evening, Alara found herself in the observation lounge of the Sanctum, which had been repaired and reinforced with human steel. Admiral Sterling was there, looking at a datapad. He looked healthier now, his arm healed, though he still carried the weight of command in the slope of his shoulders. The scouts report movement in the deep dark, Sterling said without preamble. The silence is regrouping. They know we're here now. The element of surprise is gone. Let them come, Alara said, surprised by her own ferocity. We are ready. Sterling smiled. You're sounding like a Terran, Alara. Be careful, or you'll start asking for a hamburger. Alara managed a small, mimicking smile, a gesture she was learning from them. I have tried your coffee. It is violent but effective. That's Earth in a nutshell, Sterling chuckled. Violent but effective. He swiped the datapad, projecting a new image. It was a star chart of the unknown regions beyond the rim. There's something else. We found a signal, not from the silence, from before. Before the Concordat, before the humans, an ancient signal. It's coming from a megastructure buried in a nebula 3 sectors over. It woke up when we fired the Nova cannon. We think it's a library or an armory. The precursors? Alara breathed. Myths spoke of a race that existed before the Great Silence, the ones who built the warp gates and vanished. Maybe, Sterling said. Or maybe it's a warning. We're sending an expedition. The Hephaestus is leading it. I want you to come. Alara's heart fluttered. To leave the Sanctum, to go into the unknown. A month ago, the thought would have induced catatonia. Now it felt like an adventure. Why me, she asked. Because you were the one who shouted into the dark, Sterling said seriously. You have the instinct. You knew when to break the rules to save your people. That makes you one of us, whether you have high-gravity bones or not. We need a diplomat who isn't afraid to scream. Alara looked at the stars. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of her but it was no longer a cage. It was fuel. I will go, she said. The alliance between the Deathworlders and the Garden Worlders was about to face its next great test. They had survived the fire. Now they had to survive the mystery. The galaxy was vast, dark, and full of terrors. But as the Hephaestus powered up its engines, flanked by Sylvari frigates and Vross cruisers, Alara knew one thing for certain. They were no longer alone in the dark. The fleet moved out, leaving the sanctuary of the station behind. As they engaged their warp drives, the space around them distorted, bending light and reality. The sensation was nauseating for the Sylvari crew, but Alara held onto the railing, her eyes fixed on the forward view screen. The stars blurred into streaks of light. They were heading toward the signal, toward the ancient megastructure, toward the truth of why the galaxy was so empty and why the silence hungered. On the bridge of the Hephaestus, Sterling stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He watched the slipspace tunnel, his mind calculating variables. He knew the peace they had forged was fragile. He knew the silence was only the first wave. He knew that the ancient signal might be a trap, but he also knew that humanity had spent its entire existence preparing for this. From the caves to the skyscrapers to the starships, every struggle had been a rehearsal for the defense of the light. "Admiral," the comms officer said, "we are receiving a telemetry stream from the target. It's music." "Music," Sterling frowned. "Structured harmonic resonance," the officer clarified. "Complex, mathematical, it's beautiful." Alara stepped forward. "Let me hear it." The officer patched it through. The bridge was filled with a haunting, melancholic melody, played on instruments that sounded like glass and wind. It was a song of mourning, but also of defiance. "I know this song," Alara whispered, her skin pulsing rapidly. "It is the lament of the first. It is a Silvari myth. We thought it was just a story about the creation of the stars." "It's not a story," Sterling said, his eyes narrowing. "It's a log, a history." "They are singing about the enemy," Alara translated, her voice trembling. "They call it the entropy. The silence is just its shadow. The entropy is the end of all things, and they locked it away." "And we just knocked on the door," Sterling muttered. The fleet dropped out of warp. Before them lay the source of the signal. It was a ring world, shattered and broken, orbiting a black hole. But one section remained intact, glowing with a defiant blue light. And guarding it were ships. Ancient, automated, crystalline ships that looked like the ancestors of the Silvari vessels, but built for war. "Unknown vessels powering up," Tactical reported. "They are locking weapons." "Do not fire," Sterling ordered. "Alara, speak to them, sing to them." Alara took the mic. She didn't speak. She sang. She sang the countermelody to the lament, a song of remembrance she had learned as a child. Her voice, pure and resonant, carried over the subspace channels. The ancient ships paused, the weapons powered down. A voice returned, archaic and dusty, speaking a dialect of Silvari that hadn't been heard in 10,000 years. "The children have returned, and they have brought the Iron Guardians." Alara looked at Sterling. "They mean you." "Iron Guardians," Sterling mused. "I like it better than Deathworlders." The path was open. The Hephaestus drifted toward the ring world. Inside lay the secrets of the past and the weapons needed to fight the future. The humans and the aliens, the iron and the glass, moved forward together. The cry for help had reached Earth, and Earth had answered with fire. But now they would answer with something stronger, unity. The dark universe watched, and for the first time in eons it felt a flicker of fear. The prey had become the predators, and the hunt was just beginning. Deep within the ring world, lights flickered on, responding to the human biosigns. The ancient systems recognized the density, the aggression, the will to survive. They had been waiting for a species like this, a species that could hold the weapon the precursors had left behind. As Alara and Sterling stepped onto the ancient deck of the ring world, they saw it. A massive console pulsing with the same blue light, and above it a hologram of the galaxy, but different. It showed the safe zones, the danger zones, and the location of the entropy's heart. Sterling placed his hand on the console. The machine hummed, accepting his touch. "This is going to be a long war," Sterling said quietly. Alara placed her hand over his, her fragile fingers resting on his scarred knuckles. "We have time," she said, "and we have fire." The screen faded to black, leaving only the hum of the ship and the promise of the stars. The story of the Concordat was over. The saga of the Terran Alliance had begun, and in the darkness, the stars burned a little brighter, fueled by the defiant roar of a species that refused to go quietly into the night.